Mara had always felt at home in a kitchen. Any kitchen, really. The clang of utensils, the hiss of butter hitting a hot pan, the comforting rhythm of chopping vegetables. It was her element. But tonight, that sense of familiarity felt strangely distant. She was helping her close friend, Leela, host a small dinner gathering, something she usually enjoyed. Yet for reasons she couldn't quite name, she felt uneasy, her nerves humming louder than the simmering pots on the stove. Guests mingled in the living room, their laughter floating faintly into the kitchen like echoes from another world. Mara wiped her hands on her apron and tried to focus on the task in front of her, finally dicing herbs for a sauce. Her thoughts wandered, her fingers slower than usual. She wasn't expecting anything unusual from this night. It was supposed to be simple, predictable, a distraction from her busy week. Then the kitchen door creaked open. "Mara?" A familiar voice called from behind her. Her hands froze mid-dice. She closed her eyes for a brief second, recognizing the warmth in the tone before she even turned around. Elias. She hadn't seen him in nearly 6 months, not since the quiet, painful drifting apart neither of them discussed but both of them felt. The last time they'd spoken had been short, awkward, and heavy with unsaid things. She never knew whether to miss him or resent him for leaving without explanation. Now he stood in the doorway, holding a grocery bag in one hand and wearing a slightly sheepish smile. The soft kitchen light framed him in a way that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. He said, "Leo said you needed an extra pair of hands." Mara forced a polite smile. "Yeah, I guess so." She stepped aside, clearing a place for him on the counter, though internally she was scrambling to regain her composure. The atmosphere thickened instantly, subtle, unspoken, unmistakable. A quiet tension that only exists when two people share a history they've never fully addressed. Elias put the bag down, rolled up his sleeves, and washed his hands. His movements were familiar, confident, like he still belonged here beside her. Mara kept her gaze on the cutting board, but she felt acutely aware of him, his presence, his closeness, even the sound of his breathing as he dried his hands on a kitchen towel. He asked, "So, how have you been?" She replied, "Busy." Too quickly. He chuckled softly, and for a moment, the sound brought back memories of old evenings spent talking about everything and nothing. But Mara shut the nostalgia down. This wasn't the time. She had cooking to do, a dinner to help prepare, a heart to keep steady. Still, every small interaction, the passing of utensils, the brushing of fingertips, the quiet words exchanged reminded her that something between them was unresolved. And being alone with him in this kitchen after so many silent months apart made it impossible to pretend nothing had changed. Because something had, or at least something was about to. The kitchen seemed smaller now, closer, as Mara and Elias moved around each other, preparing the ingredients for the evening. The hum of conversation from the living room faded into a distant murmur. In that moment, it was as if the rest of the world didn't exist, just them, the chopping boards, and the simmering pots. Every movement carried a weight, a subtle electricity that Mara hadn't expected. They worked side by side, their interactions casual but tinged with something more. The brushing of hands against counters, the occasional accidental contact when reaching for a utensil. Each tiny spark was magnified, and Mara felt herself growing dizzy with the awareness. She caught herself glancing at him more than necessary, noticing the way the light hit his hair, the curve of his smile as he cracked a small joke about the uneven chopping she had done. It was impossible to ignore. The chemistry that had once defined their friendship lingered, stubborn and undeniable. Then it happened, a small accident that jolted both of them. A bowl of chopped vegetables tipped over, scattering across the counter and onto the floor. Mara bent to scoop them up, and Elias's hand brushed hers as he helped. The contact lingered for a fraction of a second too long, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. Their eyes met, and the air seemed to thicken. Both froze, caught in the moment, neither sure whether to speak, move, or retreat. Elias said, "Guess we're still not coordinated," trying to lighten the tension, his voice low, but slightly breathless. Mara laughed a little too nervously and returned to her task, though she was acutely aware of his presence. Words weren't needed. The energy between them said more than conversation ever could. Years of friendship, unspoken feelings, and past misunderstandings, all of it swirled silently, unresolved in the tight space of the kitchen. Every glance, every accidental touch became loaded with meaning. The kitchen, once just a place for preparation, had transformed. It was a stage for old wounds to surface and new sparks to ignite. And as they worked together, Mara realized that tonight might not be about the dinner at all. Something else was happening, something far more potent and dangerous than either of them were willing to admit. The question was whether they would let it consume them or step back, pretending the tension didn't exist. By the time the chopping was done, Mara knew one thing for certain. Being alone with Elias again had changed everything. The past wasn't gone, and neither were the feelings she thought she had buried. And neither of them could ignore the undeniable truth. The night was only just beginning. By now, the clatter of plates and laughter from the living room felt like a distant hum. Mara and Elias moved through the kitchen almost in silence, their focus on finishing the meal, but the air between them had grown charged in a way that neither could ignore. There was something about being alone together that stripped away the pretense of casual conversation, the polite smiles, the jokes meant to hide tension, and forced them into honesty whether they were ready or not. As Mara stirred the sauce on the stove, Elias leaned against the counter, watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. She pretended not to notice, concentrating on the rhythm of her movements, but she could feel his eyes on her, warm and searching. Finally, unable to hold it back any longer, he spoke, his voice quieter than before, almost a whisper over the simmering pots. "Mara, I should have told you months ago why I left, why I disappeared." Her hand stilled. The kitchen, normally a place of action and noise, seemed to shrink around her. She turned to face him, eyes wide, a swirl of emotions she had tried to suppress, now threatening to overwhelm her. She began, but stopped. Words felt impossible. She hadn't wanted to revisit the past, hadn't wanted to dig up the hurt and the confusion. And yet here he was, standing before her, forcing the conversation out into the open. Elias took a slow breath, as if gathering courage from the warm air of the kitchen. He admitted, "I felt I was protecting our friendship," his gaze never leaving hers. "I thought if I stayed, I'd ruin everything. But I realized too late that avoiding you, avoiding this, it was the biggest mistake I've ever made." Mara's throat tightened. She had spent months replaying that moment of silence, wondering if he had ever cared at all. Hearing him confess, hearing him admit his fear and regret made her chest ache with a mixture of relief and lingering frustration. She wanted to shout, to hug him, to ask why, but mostly she just stood there, stunned by the honesty she had longed for and feared in equal measure. She finally admitted, I felt that way too. I just didn't know if you wanted me to feel that way. And I was angry, yes, but mostly I missed you." For a brief moment, the kitchen was silent except for the gentle simmer of the sauce, each of them processing the weight of their confessions. There was no anger now, only the raw, vulnerable truth of two people who had danced around their feelings for too long. Then, almost instinctively, they moved closer. The tension that had been simmering under polite smiles and casual touches now transformed into something more tangible, more intimate. Mara realized that the kitchen, the very space that had always represented routine and work, had become a confessional, a place where hidden truths could finally surface. And in that quiet, suspended moment, Mara understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The night had turned a corner, and for the first time in months, she felt the possibility.
The hum of the kitchen had shifted. The earlier tension, heavy with unspoken feelings, had transformed into something fragile, almost electric. Mara and Elias moved around each other with an easy rhythm now, as if months of distance had melted away in the quiet intimacy of the room. Every gesture, every glance carried weight, and Mara felt her heart thumping louder with each accidental brush of his hand or shared laugh. They were finishing the last touches on the meal when the power flickered, plunging the kitchen into dim, uneven shadows. The overhead lights buzzed and then died completely, leaving only the soft glow from the stove. For a heartbeat, the world outside the kitchen disappeared entirely. In the half-light, Elias was closer than she had realized, and the proximity made Mara acutely aware of the rapid beating of her own heart. Elias hesitated for a moment, searching her eyes as if silently asking permission to breach the unspoken boundary that had hovered between them for months. Mara met his gaze, her own breath catching, the air thick with anticipation. The kitchen, filled with the smell of herbs and simmering sauces, felt like a world suspended in time, a place where only they existed. As they reached simultaneously for a pan, their hands touched, lingering far longer than necessary. Neither of them pulled away. Instead, they let the contact stretch, each moment amplifying the tension, the emotions that had been buried under polite distance and avoidance. Mara felt warmth spread through her chest, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to acknowledge the desire she had kept hidden. Elias' voice broke the silence, soft and low. "Mara, I've wanted to tell you so much, but I didn't know how." His words trembled slightly, betraying the calm exterior he tried to maintain. Her heart swelled with a mix of relief and nervous excitement. "Elias, I feel the same," she admitted, barely above a whisper. It was a confession that had lingered on her lips for months, finally finding release in the intimacy of the darkened kitchen. They both paused, the world outside the kitchen fading further into obscurity. There was no laughter from the living room now, no clatter of dishes, only the two of them, standing close enough to feel each other's presence, to sense the shift that had quietly taken root between them. The previous walls of fear, regret, and hesitation seemed to dissolve, replaced by an undeniable connection that neither could ignore. Mara realized that the kitchen, the place that had always been about routine and work, had become a space of transformation. In this dim light, amidst the lingering aromas of their labor, something profound had begun. It was a moment that marked a turning point, a subtle but irreversible change in the way they saw each other and in the way they would move forward together. As the lights flickered back on, illuminating their faces, neither spoke immediately. Words were unnecessary. The atmosphere carried the unspoken truth. Things would never be the same again. And as they resumed tidying the kitchen, their movements were lighter, infused with an unspoken promise. A promise that the night, and the moment they had shared, had opened a door they could no longer ignore. The kitchen had settled into a quiet rhythm once more. Mara and Elias moved side by side, finishing the final touches on the meal and cleaning up as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet the atmosphere was charged, every glance and brush of fingers a reminder of the confessions and tension that had passed between them. For a few fleeting moments, it felt as if they could exist in this bubble forever, removed from the world outside, from expectations, from fear. Then, the sudden sound of voices from the living room shattered that fragile bubble. A guest had returned to the kitchen to ask a question about dessert, breaking the spell that had held them. Mara instinctively stepped back, and Elias followed, the closeness of the moment dissipating like mist in the sunlight. The sudden intrusion reminded them both of the walls they had carefully built around their emotions, walls that were no longer entirely intact, but still present. Elias ran a hand through his hair, visibly frustrated. Why does it always feel like the world wants to interrupt us? He muttered under his breath, half a joke, half an exasperated sigh. Mara couldn't help but smile faintly at his tone, recognizing the mixture of humor and vulnerability that had always drawn her to him. Yet, even the lightness of the moment couldn't mask the fact that the conversation they both needed to have remained unfinished. As the last guest left the kitchen, Mara took a deep breath, gathering courage she hadn't known she possessed. Elias. We can't keep pretending nothing's changed, she said, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. I know the night has been complicated, but we need to be honest, with each other. Elias' gaze softened, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He nodded, moving closer again, though this time with careful intention. You're right, he admitted, his voice low and sincere. I've been avoiding it for too long, and I don't want to anymore. I care about you, Mara. I've always cared. And I regret letting fear and pride make me step away when I shouldn't have. Mara's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and lingering hesitation. She had longed to hear those words, feared they might never come, and now that they had, a wave of emotion threatened to overwhelm her. I care too, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I was angry, yes, but mostly I missed you. I didn't want to admit it, not to myself, not to you. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the unspoken truth now fully voiced. The kitchen, which had already been a place of transformation, became a sanctuary for honesty and vulnerability. Their hands brushed again as if by instinct, fingers intertwining briefly, grounding them in the reality of what they had just shared. The night had changed something fundamental between them. The confessions, the brief interruptions, and the courage to speak openly had shifted the dynamic irreversibly. Mara realized that no outside voices could undo the connection that had been rekindled in this kitchen. Elias understood the same. They had confronted the truth, and in doing so, had opened the door to a future neither of them could have predicted, but both secretly hoped for. The kitchen, once ordinary and mundane, now held the memory of a turning point, a night where honesty and vulnerability had triumphed over fear, and where everything between them was forever different. After the last guest had left and the soft hum of the evening faded, the kitchen settled into a quiet stillness. The clatter of dishes and silverware was gone, replaced by the lingering aroma of herbs, spices, and the warmth of the meal they had prepared together. Mara and Elias stood side by side, cleaning up the remnants of the evening, but now the tasks felt different. There was no awkward tension, no hesitant glances hiding unspoken feelings. The air between them was lighter, yet charged with a sense of possibility, an invisible thread connecting them in a way it never had before. Elias rinsed the last pan and set it on the drying rack, glancing at Mara with a soft, uncertain smile. She met his eyes, and for the first time in months, there was no pretense between them. Everything, the awkwardness, the longing, the frustration, had been laid bare. And in the quiet aftermath, they were left with the unspoken question, where do they go from here? Mara reached for a towel and began wiping the counter, stealing a glance at Elias. I never realized, she said slowly, how much I missed us. Her voice was steady but gentle, filled with the honesty that had defined their conversation all evening. Elias moved closer, his gaze steady, his expression serious yet tender. I know, he replied. I've been thinking about it every day since we drifted apart. I didn't know how to fix it, but tonight, being here with you, it's like nothing else matters. I just want to try again, properly this time. Her chest tightened with emotion. The fear she had carried of rejection, of losing the friendship they had carefully maintained, was now replaced by hope. I want that too, she admitted. But we have to promise to be honest from now on, no more hiding behind fear or pretending we don't care. He nodded, reaching for her hand in a quiet gesture that was both reassuring and intimate. Their fingers intertwined naturally, comfortably, and the simple contact spoke volumes. There was a shared understanding, a silent agreement that they were ready to face whatever came next together. The kitchen, which had witnessed months of tension, fleeting touches, and quiet confessions, now became a symbol of their new beginning. The space where their emotions had simmered alongside pots and pans had transformed into the birthplace of their renewed connection. Mara realized that this was more than just a physical place. It was a metaphor for the care, patience, and attention that relationships required. They had nurtured something fragile tonight, and now it could grow. As they finished tidying up and stepped back, Elias smiled, a mixture of relief and joy lighting his face. Mara returned the smile, feeling a warmth that went far beyond the kitchen's walls. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely seen, completely understood. They left the kitchen side by side, hands still intertwined, hearts lighter and spirits hopeful. Everything had changed between them, not just the night, not just the kitchen, but the way they would approach each other and their future together. And as the door closed behind them, Mara knew this was the beginning of something real, something lasting, born from honesty, vulnerability, and the quiet intimacy of a night that had turned their world upside down.